everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel on breaking barriers, how generative AI empowers teams in data access and collaboration, brought to you by our friends at Snowflake, Informatica, Metaphor, and Graft. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data science community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to discuss how generative AI is democratizing data like never before, breaking down barriers and making information accessible to teams across various domains. Today, you'll learn how generative AI is playing a pivotal role in dismantling data silos, fostering collaboration, and enabling teams to seamlessly access and share critical information. You'll also gain practical knowledge and implementation strategies for incorporating Gen AI into your team's workflows, ensuring a smoother transition toward data democratization and enhanced accessibility. We're honored today to hear from our distinguished panel of experts: Julian Forero, AI Product Marketing Lead at Snowflake; Rudra, Director of Technical Marketing at Informatica; Adam Oliner, CEO and founder of Graft; and Kirit Basu, who is the Head of Product at Metaphor. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features throughout the talks. We're dedicating a portion at the end to Q&A, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your Gen AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn more about how to empower your teams with data democratization and Gen AI, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors Snowflake, Informatica, Metaphor, and Graft. Now, without further ado, let's kick off our panel. I'm going to welcome our panelists to the stage. All right, welcome, gentlemen. Very nice to meet you, and happy to have you with us on this webinar today. So we're going to kick things off with some quick introductions. If we could just go around the horn and each of you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your organizations and your roles, starting with Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam Oliner, CEO and founder of Graft. We are making the AI of the 1% accessible to the 99% with something we call an intelligence layer. It sits above your company's information layer to help you build better products, run a more efficient business, and innovate faster. Prior to Graft, I've been working with data and AI for almost 25 years, including academic research at MIT, Stanford, and Berkeley, a previous startup using machine learning to do mobile battery diagnostics, and I led the AI teams at Splunk and Slack. Good to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Kirit?
Hi there. I'm Kirit Basu. I'm head of product here at Metaphor Data. We are a metadata platform, a very modern metadata platform. And in addition to all the typical governance things that people like to do with our platform, we obviously also allow a lot of Gen AI. So we bring Gen AI to try and help solve problems around data governance, data democratization, etc. Previously, I was head of product at StreamSets, which is an ETL data ops play, and been in the space for a while.
Great. Rudra?
Hello, everyone. I'm Rudra, director at Informatica. We are a data management platform company across the various different areas of data, like data integration, data quality, master data management, even data marketplace and data governance, and all other areas with the data management. So I'm with Informatica over 20 years on data. My experience lies over data management, data architecture, and consulting. Currently, I lead technical marketing team where we bring our technical knowledge to products and marketing campaigns and launches. My expertise is grasping customer different business challenges and helping them to achieve optimum technical solutions. So I'm really passionate about data management and its tremendous impact on AI and analytics, and thrilled to be here and share my insight to you all.
Thanks, Rudra. Julian?
Hey everyone, Julian Forero here. I lead product marketing for all of our AI suite here at Snowflake. And one of the things, for example, today we just launched a new LLM focused on enterprise tasks. So really excited to be here, talk more about this space. In general, if you're ever curious about the Snowflake platform and what I cover, really there's two pieces to it. There's Snowpark for traditional machine learning oriented stuff, and now Cortex for generative AI stuff. Been in the space for a while. Started back when we were doing machine learning on-prem at scale using Spark, and now working on making things easier in the cloud. So really excited to be here and talk about the shift.
Excellent. Welcome to all of you. So first thing, today we're talking about data democratization. So just taking a step back first and kind of getting a sense of how we define data democratization in the context of modern enterprises, and why is it more critical now than ever? So Julian, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think the dream has always been kind of one thing, right? How do you have a single source of truth, and how do you give everyone access to a single source of truth? And I think anybody that's tried to do that sort of realizes quickly that there's a lot of pieces in logistics around it that kind of make that a little bit challenging. And I think the hardest piece around it is not the fact that it's easy to put data in one place, right? It's easy to just dump it in one place, but actually make it useful, which means someone needs to kind of own the quality of that data. And I think that's where the hardest piece of democratization comes in, is how do you make sure it's of high quality, and how do you make sure it's fresh enough to make decisions at a given point in time? And so I think kind of what we're seeing in the market is how do you balance these two technical ideas, which is a data lake, right? You're dumping kind of everything in one place, and you're ensuring you have access, as well as something that is more around governance and ownership of data assets in some sort of more distributed format, where like different business units own the data, and then you share that. And so how do you balance that where you have ownership to make sure there's clean data, but then sort of like a single source of truth, so that not everyone's creating copies of the same thing and having different versions of everything. And so at the end, it turns out to be a little bit of a both technical governance as well as team governance, and how all of that gets managed. So I'll tell you, if there's two things to address, is how do you think more about the technical governance, right? How does the platform give you all the features to say who has access to what level, and what versions of the data? And then from an operational side, how does your team develop governance and procedures around ensuring who owns the quality of different data sets so they're actually useful? So start with governance, and that will get you, I think, started.
Great points. Rudra, I think you wanted to weigh in on that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to add to the point, yes, definitely for the data governance standpoint, which kind of democratization provide the broader, easier data access and trust in the decisions. Now, in the world of the AI, right, where we need to realize the full potential of the AI, so that we can allow everyone to access the data, and problem can be solved much more quickly, and business can react quickly to the changes as well. So overall, data democratization is the essential step in enabling the different organizations or enterprises to keep pace of the different AI developments, also at the same time enhance the different decision making, and build more equitable AI systems, and establish a data-centric culture overall.
Yeah, great points. Adam or Kirit?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so, I think we've been talking as an industry about democratization for a while now. But I think one of the challenges that's been in the space is it's really democratization for, let's face it, the data savvy part of the organization. And everyone else, the less technical you get, the less data savvy you get, you don't really get to participate so much. And so this is actually a really nice inflection point, because now it's just natural language. You ask simple questions, you can provide better context, etc. So I absolutely agree with everyone who mentioned the governance problems, the quality problems, all of those things. They're all important, but I think it's really useful to think about where this actually takes us, where everyone gets to participate. And that's something that, even in our world, as we get into governance from Metaphor's perspective, we think very hard about, how do we enable even the less technical people to fully participate at whatever level that they want and play a role in this whole equation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to build on what Kirit is saying here, because I think a lot of definitions of data democratization focus on access to the data, but I think that's insufficient. So, like, how many of you have a library card? Cool. How many of you know how to perform open heart surgery? Right. I mean, you could go to the medical section of a library and find more than enough information there to learn how to perform the operation, but you don't. Most people don't. It's not a search issue. A librarian could easily point you to the good book on the subject. So why not? Well, a few reasons. I mean, first of all, not all the information is going to be in one place. So you could learn about the operation in one book, but what about another book that describes complications that could arise if a patient has a certain condition? How would you even know to ask to see that book if you're not an expert already? Second, not all the information is in a form that's appropriate for you as the consumer. As Kirit was saying, a lot of data is in a form that only data scientists know how to do anything with. And these medical books are for doctors. So reading and understanding are not the same thing. Third, there are a lot of books that straight up do not have the right information. Like you can find older medical texts that talk about the 4 humors. And if you're not an expert on the subject, how would you know it's wrong? And further, medicine is a rapidly changing field. So there might be recent research papers or experiences that individual doctors had that aren't even in the library, but are critical to the outcomes. So even from that simple example, it should be obvious that access to data is not enough. You need to aggregate, synthesize, summarize, enrich, interpret, corroborate, and so on, all of which can be done with modern AI techniques. And obviously that's a big part of the intelligence layer that we built at Graft. But you also asked why it's more critical than ever. And that's because of 2 reasons in particular. One is that this metaphorical library is bigger than ever and growing quickly. And the other is that your employees are no longer the only consumer of that data trying to drive business value. Now you have AI as well.
Yeah, great point. So I think that tees off really well to our next question, Adam, which is what types of challenges do organizations face when they're trying to implement data democratization, when somebody is tasked within an organization with democratizing access to certain types of tools or certain data sets? What potential pitfalls might they encounter and how could they address those challenges?
So I think there are political challenges and then there are technical challenges. I won't say much about the political challenges except to observe something that I learned when I was at Stanford that someone said to me, which is that there's no problem that can't be solved by the right signature on the right piece of paper. The trick is just making that risk-reward trade-off make sense for them. On the technical side, I'll observe that the data in any real organization is generally not complete or correct or clean or current. So a tool that's basically just search on top of that data, even if you put it all in one place, only means that you get the wrong answer faster. You can overcome a lot of these data challenges with AI, but not without substantial supporting infrastructure. And most organizations don't have the resources or the expertise to build it. It's not the sexy parts of AI, right? It's like the grungy plumbing and complex dependencies and systems engineering. Smaller organizations just don't have the engineering resources to build that infrastructure or solve those data challenges. Larger organizations often think they do, but realize much later that it was harder than they thought. Like I saw a stat last week about AI initiatives at large enterprises in manufacturing that said that only 9% of executives who managed to bring an AI solution to production were happy with the quality of that solution and the resources that were required to deliver it. So the other 91% wasted a bunch of resources trying to build something that they weren't even happy with in the end. And that's only the fraction that managed to ship something at all. So I think the real engineering needs to get done to solve these problems. And a lot of folks are just not aware of the complexities involved there.
Absolutely. Julian, do you have thoughts on this one?
So kind of going back a little bit to what Adam mentioned on the previous, as he was answering the previous question, it's like information is everywhere. And so the challenge as we're thinking of like, okay, let's say I have my data, let's say it's clean, right? We're doing a lot of assumptions, as Adam was mentioning, the hard part. Let's say I have my pipelines ready and I have all this information sort of ready to be accessed, right? Problem number 1 is maybe you need to access that in a relational system and you don't know how to write SQL. And so then that becomes a roadblock, right? And so this is where generative AI starts to come in. It's like, hey, we could have a system actually take care of that for you and be able to do that. And that sounds like a really good idea because then now I can just ask, hey, what were the sales in the last month for this region? And I can change that question to something else and never have to write SQL to do any of that, never have to interact with a dashboard, play with filters or anything like that. What we're seeing customers that have that vision is realizing that in the real world, having an LLM understand and the contextual information of how all those tables or all that information comes together is the hardest part. And so I think a technical challenge that sort of organizations need to start thinking about as they're going into this generative AI phase where everybody can talk to the data is how do we describe that semantic layer, right? What is the relationship between this data and this other? Because I really like that library example, right? I know I can go to this section because it's there. So there's some guidance that tells me based on these 3 numbers on the bookshelf, I know all this stuff around heart surgery is going to be there. And then that's going to be related to symptoms of heart surgery because of these other codes in the library. Most organizations haven't really thought about that, right? Like someone in sales has their table and that information, someone in marketing has their table with their information. How the two come together may not always be easily defined. And so if an analyst that knows the table struggles to do that, it's really hard for an LLM to be able to just make that up on their own. And they will, right? LLMs hallucinate, and so they'll be able to make up stuff if you give them the chance. And so I would say that the technical challenge is how do we put human knowledge into technical systems? And that's something that organizations need to start thinking about in this new wave of democratization.
Absolutely. Kirit or Rudra, did you guys have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to also add what Adam just mentioned, another is the ethical challenge which comes with the data democratization, right? So for example, like we have multiple different data we trained to the AI, and data democratization is a good area for training those AI models as well. Now, let's say take an example for a resume screening model, right? Where if that model has been trained based on the previous people who have been hired, it might be also get biased to a specific set of group, which AI model might give a little bit more preference than others, right? So that is another area of the data governance where we need to look at like expand the model or democratize the model, but at the same time needs to kind of making sure that overall the model has been properly trained on those specific areas where not a specific group of people does not get a specific preference. Rather, it should be much more democratized and a much more unbiased way of looking into that. And a couple of other points I wanted to highlight about the democratization challenge, which we see more often from our customers, are data quality. So unless you have the real quality of data, which is kind of really will not give you the right results, and AI model will try to do some hallucination, which is kind of sharing some of the information, which is sharing wrong results at really confidently, right? And also the another point what Julian was mentioning about, okay, there is a data, right? So how we can make sense of that properly, right? Because if we have the data overall, but if I do not really make sense of the data, there is no point. So that educational gap is another biggest challenge which we also see from the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts. So you completely agree with what folks were saying. The one other piece that I see a lot of times is having that clarity of vision of what is it exactly that you're trying to achieve, I think is absolutely critical to this whole thing. Because the worst mistakes that we've seen is customers telling us, oh yeah, we got this Copilot for free, we're just going to use it. I'll leave the companies out of the discussion, but that's it. Like, that's the point of view. We're doing AI, we're doing Gen AI because we have Copilot. Very soon, we're going to have to invent a new word like we did for data swamp in the context of data lake. So think about some psychedelic hallucination, something or the other, right? So I think that sort of clarity is absolutely critical to begin with. And I think it's also important to start, as with every other thing, start small, like have extremely focused outcomes that you're trying to chase after, solve them, and then sort of amplify that for there. Because the easiest mistakes to make in this Gen AI world is literally opening it up and saying, oh, ask any question. Well, that's not really going to work quite as well. I mean, you'd have mixed results, and then you'd have to go into a whole bunch of problems to deal with. So I think, clarity, leadership, starting small, those are also important things to talk about.
Yeah, great points. And you do run the risk of jeopardizing future initiatives if you roll something out and it doesn't work well. So that's it is critical to make sure that while something seems very attractive like Copilot, that you've got the things in place to be able to do that effectively, so that you build trust for future initiatives. That kind of leads to the next point, which is what steps can companies take, either on the technical side or in terms of which solutions they source, or culturally in terms of data literacy. What steps can they take to ensure data quality and governance while they are trying to democratize data access? And why don't we start with Adam?
So I want to build on what Kirit was just saying, because I see a lot of organizations say that they're sort of not ready for AI because their data is not ready. And so they try to solve data readiness in the abstract, but that's not a well-defined activity. It's really easy to come up with examples of data transformations that turn the data into a form that's better for one use case and worse for another. So knowing what you're setting out to do, even if that's a smaller goal at the outset, is critical because it tells you what data readiness even means, even for that individual initiative. So figure out what you want to accomplish, like what outcomes you want as an organization, and let that be the driving force for the activities that you perform. And the second thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but which I think is going to start to bite folks, is about permissions models. So old permissions models just don't make sense in an AI world. So we need to start thinking about them differently. I'll give a really simple example here. One of the things that AI does is it will take multiple pieces of information and will infer a new piece of information. So you might have information about your customers that are in a CRM and a ticketing system and Slack or wherever. You want to predict something useful about that customer. Okay, so the individual pieces of data have different permissions associated with them potentially. So we'll keep it really simple. You got two pieces of information trying to predict a third. Half the company can see one piece and can't see the other, and vice versa. Okay, so now I make that prediction. Who gets to see that prediction? There are two possibilities. Either everyone can see it, in which case you leak information about data that they shouldn't have been able to see on one side or the other, or nobody can see it and you don't get to do any AI. So you have to rethink what it means to set permissions and give access to these things. So like one metaphor that I've found useful is as a sort of AI teammate. So don't think like co-pilots and assistants. Think of it just as a metaphor for how to think about what your AI has access to. Think of it as a teammate. So what would a canonical member of a particular team have access to? That's what the AI should have access to. And that means that anyone on the team can see the results of that AI and the work that it's doing. This is a deep area where there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But I think folks who are hoping or expecting that they will adopt solutions that just do pass-throughs of the underlying permissions and somehow everything remains self-consistent, I think they're going to be disappointed or worse.
Absolutely. Kirit, did you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think a couple of other sort of challenges that I think as an industry we have not really solved yet is, given that now AI has access to, of course, structured but semi-structured, unstructured data, lots and lots of unstructured data, that has that world had never been tapped into. Yeah, of course we were doing some stuff with unstructured, but this is like a whole new level, as we know, especially with the multimodal LLMs that are coming out. But I think one of the pieces that's really lacking is that the sort of architecture or framework to understand what quality means in this world really has not come into play just yet, right? So, for example, you might have a definition of a particular term that you're looking at, but you don't know at what point was it scanned within, even if you are being like very rigid and making sure it was only going after certain documentation so that it's quote unquote source of truth. But then at what time frame did it change over time? Has that been taken into account? So that sort of quality things, I think, are really, really critical for companies to consider as well. And so that's why, again, back to that original point, like Adam was suggesting, that the hyper-focused AI assistant, AI sort of accelerator for perhaps just one particular thing that's tuned, knows exactly what it's talking about. There's like zero hallucinations. I think those are types of things that companies should really be focusing on before opening even the smallest, sort of component out there.
Absolutely. Rudra or Julian, any thoughts on this one?
So to add to what Kirit just saying, like, so for example, if you are really doing like an exploratory data analysis, right? In that case, yes, you can still good with some hallucination area, right? But if you are making the AI to make your critical business decision, then you need to have the phase which is called a zero hallucination overall, right? So we need to make sure that how the data is being used is very, very critical for the business outcome. And another critical business aspect or more of a technological aspect, which is really drive the data democratization going forward, is the advancement with the NLP or natural language processing, where the users really need to talk to their data as it coming along, and also do some deriving some of the output outcome along with that. So Informatica provides something called Clear GPT, where you can actually do the overall natural language based calling, where you can actually talk to the data, where you can know the insights about the data, and also at the same time making some of those predictive decisions or along the way as you move forward.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to everything that the team has already said is one, sort of what Adam, there's a balance of focus and like what do you want to do and sort of think holistically about the pieces that you need to put together. But also it's not about just picking one, but a couple, so that as you're defining your platform strategy, you're like, okay, I'm going to be able to support this in the short term, but then also these other things in the long term. And I think as part of that, the only other thing that I would add is we're still trying to figure out what LLMs are really good at. And what I would say is try to start with things where you don't have to change the LLM and then move into things where you do have to change the LLM, right? So with all this unstructured data knowledge, how can I do a lot more text analytics, things around documents that I really haven't untapped in the past? How can I do a lot of those things that maybe don't require me to change the LLM? And then, okay, now that my team has gotten some experience with these things, removing hallucinations, doing a lot of this stuff that we're all dealing with, let me move to something a little more complicated, right? And then you can go in the spectrum of like fine tuning to agents, right? And we're talking about a lot of complexities that you'll be introducing there. But of course, now you're grounded on some level of experience that takes you there. And so I would say scope enough to get started, but just a little bit beyond that, so you know how to make enough long-term decisions. And then don't add over complexity. I think everyone wants to chat with the data as the first goal, when there's a lot of other things that you can do to prove out use cases, prove out ROI, and get teams started. And so that's kind of one way to see how a framework to tackle some of those challenges that have been highlighted in the conversation so far.
Yeah, great points. And I just want to highlight one thing I'm seeing kind of in the chat and the Q&A, kind of a general theme, which is some folks are definitely expressing like, well, why should we bother? This sounds really hard. This sounds like there's a lot of potential pitfalls. Like, what makes it so attractive to actually pursue projects around Gen AI and LLMs and data democratization? What is the pitch to the organization that makes it worth it, and how do we measure that ROI? So if you guys want to speak to that.
I could take the first tab. I think there's always two parts to ROI, which I think is an important thing to remember. One is what you bring in, and the other one is the cost to bring that in. One of the things you have to figure out is, okay, is the way that I'm implementing things going to make it easy for me to track the cost of doing all those things? And so that's one part of the ROI equation. And so the more systems you try to put together and you have no idea which one is doing what and what cost all that is taking, then that's going to make it really hard. And so you kind of have to be, okay, how do I bring just enough pieces to be able to calculate the cost of all these things? The second thing, and mostly in the first phase of LLMs, is going to be productivity. And so you are going to be bounded by like, okay, how productive is this making me, or is making my team? And right, you are going to be dealing with a lot of, call it FTE or full-time employee calculations to do that. And then as part of that, you might start to see a lift in revenue or other areas, such as, okay, if I'm doing a lot more efficient customer service, I'm enabling my customer service agents to be more effective, am I seeing a lift in X or seeing a reduction of churn? And how does then that impact the bottom line? So remember that it's a full equation of costs as well as benefits. And so making sure that you think about both is an important part of the ROI plan and business plan that you can bring to your executives.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that a little bit, I mean, I think this is also why identifying the outcomes that you want ahead of time is so important, because it lets you define what these metrics are by which you're going to judge success. So, you know, for example, I think Rudra earlier mentioned sort of this zero hallucination goal. And for certain use cases, that might be exactly what you need. But for a lot of use cases, it might not. It's like, I'll take self-driving cars as an example. Humans are terrible drivers. Like, we kill tens of thousands of people every year. But what you mostly read about is this one time that some self-driving car got stuck at an intersection or something. Because we aren't thinking about this in terms of what is the status quo versus what are the outcomes that we want to get. So if we were talking about it in that sense, as soon as per mile self-driving cars are safer than human drivers, which, by the way, it might have already happened, we should be totally in favor of getting as many of those on the road as possible, because people will die less. Like, that is the outcome that we should want from that particular kind of project. The answer to why people should be investing in this stuff, even if it's sometimes hard, is that when it works really well. Like, this is a really powerful technology with broad applicability across businesses. It can have huge impacts on metrics that really matter, like efficiency and revenue and job satisfaction, all sorts of other things. Yeah, you have to do it right. Yeah, it's hard. But there are solutions, like what we built at Graft, that make it a lot easier. That mean you don't have to think about a lot of these harder problems. You can just pick up a solution that does it. And we're still early days. I mean, the industry, not Graft. And so these tools will get better over time. So a lot of the problems that we're gesturing towards are getting solved by these tools, by the industry. But starting now is great, because there are outcomes that you can achieve today with relatively little work, assuming, again, you approach it in the right way. So it's absolutely worth it.
I'll chime in with one thought, which is, every time a new piece of technology comes in, there's, of course, that ROI computation. All of those things need to be done. But this is one of those weird spots in history where when companies come out, smaller companies perhaps come out and innovate on these areas, it's literally a game changer, right? Like, it's disruption to the max, if you will. And so I think it's really critical for enterprises to pay really close attention to the fact that, hey, here's how an LLM or a competitor, in the worst case, could actually completely upend our business and how we're doing things. So it's really critical to pay attention to that. And then, of course, yes, you want to have ROI, but in some cases there might be a long tail to this, right? Like, you have to be able to make the pitch that this is for overall improving your company. Start small, but you'll get to the other side easily. The worst mistakes you can make is not participating because, oh, it's too crazy, it's too early, etc. Because tomorrow there might be someone else who's doing this like 100 times better than you are.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to chime in actually before I kind of give the ROI part is more of an example, right? For example, let's say you are like an insurance industry, and one of your customer comes in and they are asking, okay, how can I get a good driver discount? So you ping the chat, and the answer you will get without any context that, hey, you maintain good driving history and you will get a driver discount, right? But that's not helping the user, because they want some specific answer to that problem, right? So what they do is probably they will integrate, the insurance company integrate that with their broader data management platform, where they can actually provide the context of that user, like where the user is coming from, and what is their history and what is their driving record overall, right? So then when they make that information back there, then the actual AI will give you like the results. If you know further tickets or anything, you might get the driver discount maybe 2 months from now. So that type of answers users are looking more from a contextual standpoint and others. So that ROI measurement is very, very, I would say, dependent on the organizational broader goals, but more from practical or pragmatic standpoint, it is start small, like seeing some of the early wins. And in order to do that, there are certain use cases where Informatica and other things supports in terms of the broader AI journey. For example, like retrieval augmented generation, where you are augmenting the model with your right context, right? So you see some of the results because that is much more practical. You don't have to spend a lot of time training your model, like fine tuning the model, which is much more expensive from a cost and effort and resource standpoint. And then what you can do is, once you are getting some good results with RAG, and then you can ask for more budget and to kind of show that success for the next step, right? And also we are seeing from our standpoint, yes, the different AI agents or even the retrieval augmented generation are much more practical in start with to kind of gain or kind of calculate your ROI much faster.
Yeah, great points. One of the other topics that's bubbling up a lot in the chat and the questions is for organizations that are trying to do a lot of these things, like build a chatbot with agents, how do they scope that out? How do they determine what they should build in-house, what they should rely on external technological solutions for, how big their team needs to be? How do you scope that project, and where does it make sense to leverage a solution that already exists versus trying to build something in-house, and how do you make that determination?
Yeah, that actually gives to my example. I just take a quick first step before I can hand it over to other one. But it's like, again, if you're building like something called a chatbot, so something on that type of format, it's much more practical. Probably you wanted to, rather than investing heavily building your own large language model, it's better to utilize some of the models available in the market, Anthropic or OpenAI and other different types of models which are available. Now, what you can do is you can augment your data set with that model to kind of maintain that specific contextual information before you can dive faster on more expensive version of that, or making it more matured way of doing fine tuning of those models, or going into kind of building on your own model itself.
I think engineers really like to build things, but using these sort of current technology stacks, so thinking about like embeddings in vector databases or foundation models and the systems for doing inference and training on them and all of that, these are new technologies. So that there are no developers that have more than a handful of years of experience with it. So when they come and they say like, yeah, no, I can build that myself, they're generally speaking from a place of ignorance. It almost never makes sense to try to build this stack for yourself out of pieces. Like the stat that I was sharing earlier about success in the enterprise with AI being so incredibly low, part of that is because engineers say, oh, I could totally take this foundation model and this vector database, I slap them together, ta-da, I have a solution to my problem, right? And of course, that's not how it works at all. It's much more complicated than that. So should you build? Almost certainly not. And certainly not until you have tried things off the shelf that basically solve the problem already and see how far that gets you. It might be that for 99% of the problems that you want to solve as an organization, or the goals that you want to set, you can solve it with something off the shelf. It might be that for that last 1%, you need to go and build something. But you shouldn't start by building that thing because you don't really know what it's going to look like. And I think to sort of double down on this point, if someone has already built that system that you're thinking of building yourself, they've made some technological bets around what the world is going to look like, the direction that these technologies are going to take. Likely, you're going to make the same technological choices, but building is going to be way more expensive and way more time consuming than taking that solution off the shelf. And there are two possibilities. Either you're both right or you're both wrong. If you're both right, well, that's great. You can always build your system later, but at least you had a solution to your problem today. And if you're both wrong, then you would like to have taken the cheaper, quicker path so that you can make a different choice that you want to spend your money on later. So almost always it makes sense to buy something that solves the problem today rather than try to build something yourself.
Yeah, one thought I had on this was, it also comes down to sort of core competencies of an organization. So, if your business is all about data or is about AI, absolutely, you're going to be doing those investments. But if you're selling a service, you're selling a hardware product or something of that sort, then everything Adam mentioned totally makes sense, right? Like, are you investing to be good at something that is really not what your core business is all about? In which case, choose the best of the breed in the industry and go with that.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add on all of that is really, do you build or do you buy? I think what's going to happen more and more is the applications or tools that we continue to use on a day-to-day basis, those are going to have their own generative AI experiences, and they're going to have their own copilots built into it. And for teams that spend a lot of time in a single application, maybe that's enough, right? And you don't need to kind of build something that's more cohesive and sort of like super grandiose and like talk to all of my data. Maybe I just need to talk to the data that's in this application, and that is enough for the scope of what I wanted to do. That's enough democratization of that data to the teams that interact with that application. But if I'm kind of at a point where I have multiple applications that need to be connected with each other, then right, I think that's when you need to start thinking more holistically. What are the pieces that, again, I want to build versus buy? And again, I think just know that we're all new to this, even us building the technology behind it. So it's okay to try and fail, and then it's of course okay to kind of give your team a little bit of room to be able to make some of those tests, try it out, see how it goes, make improvements, learn from those, and continue hiring the teams that can help you build that over time.
Yeah, great points, guys. And as you guys have mentioned, we are very much in the infancy of this, and so a lot of the things that are happening today are going to shape what happens in the future. And so for organizations that are trying to think in terms of decades and not years, and trying to position themselves for long-term success in leveraging AI and then democratizing data across their organizations, what are your predictions? What do you think they should get in front of? What do you think the opportunities are, and how do you see the landscape of generative AI and data democratization evolving?
Yeah, I think to me it's the trends, and it's particularly in the enterprise. It will be around how do we make it easier to talk to data, and so there's going to be a ton of pieces that become part of that, right? Improvements we make to semantic layers and technology around that, improvements we make to graph and everything around that, improvements we make to vector data and how we store it, manage it, abstract it for organizations. And I think most importantly is going to be, even though there's tons of LLMs already, there's going to be a lot more focus around what those do. I think for the past 2 years, it's been a focus on like, let's make these LLMs as smart as graduate students from a top university. And so it's like, a lot about everything, but when you get to the first job, right, it's like you need to be really good at Excel. And so how do we get LLMs to be really good at something, to do those tasks that we kind of expect humans to do in some way? I think that's the other piece of the trend that we'll see change more over the next year or so, which is going to be really exciting.
Yeah, from my standpoint, one thing which we would like to see is like a rise of citizen data scientists, right? So it would be more like a self-service, no-code, low-code approach with a very minimal data science knowledge. The data scientists can analyze the data, derive insights, or even they can build new AI models. That's where we are trying to even focus from Informatica standpoint to provide a low-code, no-code approach to all the critical aspect of data accessibility from multi-cloud and hybrid aspect, or even doing data augmentation, where you can augment your existing data set with some of the additional insight through the data democratization, and also kind of derive build the quality data for your business, and also make it more contextualized, and also do the governance on top of
it. There's a really nice blog post that Greylock put out a while back about moats, where they talk about systems of record, systems of intelligence, and systems of engagement. And I find that to be a really useful framework for thinking about where the technology is contributing and how that might be changing over time. So first, I'll talk about the systems of record and sort of extracting the information, because I think most of the people here will immediately think of data that's sitting in systems of record, like data warehouses or SaaS tools. And that's absolutely part of it. And this was alluded to a couple of times by multiple panelists, there's also a huge amount of information in another place, which is in people's heads. So how do you get at that information? Like, most of the world's information by volume is unstructured, like text, audio, images, video. And a big part of why that's true is that that's how humans communicate. We talk, we write, we draw, and so on. And it turns out AI is pretty good at working with that unstructured data. So it presents new opportunities for making that information accessible. So more data that's in these systems of record is available, but we can also get at the things in people's heads better. The next is turning that information into forms that are useful to the organization. That's the systems of intelligence. And that could involve things like summarization or synthesis across data sources, or reformulating for a different audience, running an analysis, and so on. And again, AI can play a central role here, as can more traditional methods. And then finally, they need to deliver the value with systems of engagement. So like, chatbots are sometimes useful, but that's not always the right form. Like, sometimes you want a UI with a workflow or APIs. So all three of these different systems contribute to data democratization, and technology contributes to all three of them. And I think it's worth thinking about how all three of them independently are changing.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces that you were talking about long term, right? Like, not just the here and now as far as the vision is concerned. I think like a lot of companies, or most companies, really need to focus on what they're good at, and then see how AI can help to really, really supercharge that thing, right? Like to come into the game saying, oh, here's an LLM, here's a chatbot that will solve my problems, it's maybe a little bit, it's a weak argument. And I don't think it'll lead you to that sort of exponential growth that you'd normally that you would otherwise want to get out of systems like this. So I think going back to that, what's that actual outcome look like? How is it actually solving a business problem that you're trying to achieve and that you're trying to get better at? I think that really has to be the key of all of these pieces. And then again, right, like to be able to figure out frameworks for measuring outcomes out of these AIs they have just not been invented yet. And I think that's one of those things where the whole industry really needs to focus on making sure that we have ways to quantify these kind of outcomes properly. So in this new world where absolute fusion of every single type of data, including things that in your head, etc., like great, all of those things are there as inputs and we get to play with it, but can we actually measure that it's giving us real value? Or is it just helping someone like do a simple thing, answering a question, but it's not actually adding to business outcomes, for example? So I think there's a lot more to be done in that space, but staying focused on those outcomes are important.
Absolutely. So now we're going to wrap up with a lightning round. We're almost out of time here. So in one phrase or a few, can each panelist share one critical insight or takeaway about how generative AI will impact data democratization? So we'll start with Julian.
Yeah, I think it's without data strategy, there's no AI strategy. So keep that in mind. And then as part of that, know that you have to rethink what democratization means. I think we used to think of just putting data in one place. Now it's how do I enable everybody to talk with the data? And so with those two pieces in mind, then start crunching away and getting started.
Adam?
I think the worst thing that generative AI did was trick people into thinking there are easy solutions to hard problems, including data democratization. So foundation models are useful, but they also lack any sort of specific knowledge about your business and also lack nearly every important property of a production grade solution, like scalability or explainability or steerability, many more. You'll still need to do serious software engineering or, use Graft.
Great point. Kirit?
Yeah, so I think, my point of view would be, again, this is just a technology. Yeah, it is an amazing technology, but it's still a piece of technology. And so having that clarity of outcome and clarity of vision is absolutely critical to this, like with any other piece of technology out there.
And Rudra, we'll finish with you.
Sure. So your AI is as good as your data, right? So you might be ready for your AI, but is your data ready, or your data democratization program is ready or not? So definitely that's a critical aspect where you need to make sure your data is well prepared and having that to be making it very much easier for accessibility and democratization.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. These were really great insights. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much for all of your insights. We'll close out now. Just want a few final words for our audience. If you missed any of the webinar today or you want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available right on this webpage right after the webinar. All you have to do is refresh the page, so you'll be able to watch it. We'll also have it up on our YouTube channel this week as well. Thank you again to all of our partners, Snowflake, Informatica, Metaphor, and Graft, as well as all of our panelists today, Julian, Rudra, Adam, and Kirit, for all of your contributions making this webinar possible. Really appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar. You can look in the display the call to action below if you'd like to register for our future webinars. You can click on that link and head over to our website. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks.